Alrighty, welcome in everyone to another edition of Just Another College Football Podcast. I'm your host, as always, Tommy Brzee. It's August 12th. We're only about 11 days out from college football being fully underway, and now we got the Big 12 to talk about. We got a ton of things to get to for the Big 12. I like to call it America's Conference, my favorite conference in the entire country. We'll start with storylines, much like we did yesterday with the ACC. Then we got to jump into some tiers, if you want to call them that, kind of just breaking the teams up as I see them going into the season. Then we'll get into some players to watch, go down all of the teams, give you two players to watch on either side of the ball. Always kind of a fun exercise, gets you to know just a little bit about every team in this conference. And then we'll finish it off. I'll give my superlatives, I'll give my championship pick, and frankly, I don't think there's a championship pick in this conference that is outright wrong. I can tell you that. So it's going to be awesome to break all of this down. Let's go ahead and jump into those storylines, because I think it's one of those conferences that is as up in the air as you can possibly imagine. And that's my first storyline, is just how many teams can win this thing. And I think when you look at the odds, there's about 7 teams that are six teams that have odds better or equal to plus 850, with TCU being the lowest team there, and no one's better than plus 550, with Kansas State there at 550 leading the conference. No one knows who's going to win this conference. Iowa State's shortly behind that group, as well as a couple other teams, but Texas Tech can absolutely win this conference. Arizona State could repeat and win the conference. Kansas State, Iowa State was there a year ago and has a chance to repeat that as well. Utah coming in. Maybe Mike Gundy has a rabbit to pull out of the hat. I'd be a little bit surprised, but at the end of the day, you look at this conference. Last year, Arizona State was picked to finish 16th. They won the conference. So you never really know what's going to happen in the Big 12. Maybe Scott Frost puts it together at UCF in a way that I'm not expecting right now. But it's going to be awesome to watch this. I think the number sits around 10 teams that can realistically win this conference. I think 7 probably are in the upper echelon of that group, but I think there's a couple in that kind of lower tier of this conference, maybe 3rd or 4th tier, that could do some really special things this year. So that's going to be an interesting thing to watch. Always one of those conferences that will start pretty much every year talking about Arizona State from a couple years ago, or Arizona, or maybe a UCF from this year, or something like that, talking about how this conference is all over the place. It will likely be all over the place for quite some time to come. Then we got to talk about this. Is it just Arizona State's conference now? You know, Arizona State comes off a year where they walk into the conference or pick last in the conference and then win it. Could they just dominate this conference going forward? Could they be the Oklahoma like they were not too long ago before they moved on to the SEC? It's a very rich talent pool. It's a head coach that obviously is very energetic, doesn't seem to be going anywhere or have any desires to leave that job. He's in a position where they can kind of take over this conference this year. If they go back to Dallas and get another win in the Big 12 championship, obviously it's still going to be a very, very competitive conference going forward. But everyone's going to look to Arizona State every single year going forward, because that recruiting profile is only going to get a little bit better. Kenny Dillingham's understanding of all of this stuff is only going to get a little bit better. And then, obviously, at some point, you're going to have to replace Sam Leavitt, but it's probably not going to be this offseason. So you have the ability to continue forward going into 2026. You could put a stamp on this conference, where I thought it might be a Utah or an Oklahoma State when all those teams started coming in. It might be Arizona State if they can win a conference for the second year in a row and really make people question who else in this conference is going to challenge them going forward. This is obviously one of the teams that wants to challenge them. Texas Tech has spent quite a bit of money this offseason to make them a Big 12 contender, because going into the offseason, they just weren't really. Now, they were a team that was interesting. Maybe they could put some things together. Now they're a bona fide contender. There's no two ways about that. They have difference makers on both offensive line and defensive line that I don't think anyone else in the conference, other than maybe Utah, has on those lines of scrimmage. They have the ability to make some noise in this conference. There's no doubt about that. They have made no bones about the money that they've spent and the reason that they're spending them. They want to get back into the top echelon of this sport, and especially this conference. And I don't know what quote-unquote delivering in this season looks like. I don't know if it's 9 wins. I don't know if it has to be a Big 12 championship and a CFP berth. That's something for the people in Lubbock to figure out. But at the end of the day, you're in a position where you have an opening here. You have a conference that is absolutely wide open. You were the ones that were by far the most aggressive in this conference to go get talent. You are on paper the most talented team in this conference. Can you go take it? That's going to be a huge topic of conversation, and the pressure is very much on with a lot of those big time recruitments that could change fairly quickly if this season does not go the Red Raiders' way. Moving on to the coaches, because I think this is the best coaches across the board of any conference in the entire country. I think this is the most interesting group of guys. You have Kenny Dillingham trying to become one of the best in the entire country. You have Rich Rod and Scott Frost returning to West Virginia and UCF respectively. You have Mike Gundy and Kyle Whittingham maybe kind of winding it down for their careers, but still very, very good coaches and absolutely guys that can do a little bit more with less. And Kyle Whittingham especially has quite a bit to work with this year. So it's going to be awesome to watch all of that unfold. Obviously, you still have guys like Sonny Dykes, who was in a national title not too long ago. You have a number of other guys that are going to be really fascinating to watch in this conference. You got Joey McGuire with all the pressure in the world on him. It's going to be awesome to see all of this unfold. Obviously, the Rich Rod and Scott Frost angles are very, very fun to talk about. I think there's just so many good coaches in this conference. Matt Campbell, Lance Leipold, Chris Kleiman up there at Kansas State. It's a really, really great coaching conference. And I think when you look at this conference, you know there's going to be close games. You know there's going to be a close finish towards the end of the season. It's probably going to come down to coaching. And there's a lot of good guys on this list. Maybe it's the more veteran guys that end up winning out. Maybe it's a guy like Kenny Dillingham that is not afraid of just about any situation and will be very aggressive in some moments where maybe some older coaches would have been a little bit more conservative. And then finally, we just talked about how close this finish is going to be. Maybe it won't be. Could someone separate in this conference? Because I think that's the ultimate question. Can one team just kind of be sitting off to the side while the other 15 fight it out to figure out who's the second team to Dallas? Or is it like last year where we go into the last week of the season having no idea who's going to Dallas and Arizona State gets a win, Iowa State gets a win, and they find their way to that game? But it's going to be interesting to watch this one unfold. I think it's one of those things where Kansas State and Arizona State are probably the two teams that I think could separate the best. Maybe Texas Tech you put in that group as well. But at the end of the day, I think it's probably going to be 16 teams fighting it out. I think there's probably going to be very little separation. I think it's going to come down to tiebreakers to decide who ends up going to Dallas, and I think it's just going to be one of those conferences where every single week you look up and there's some type of upset or there's some type of mix-up in the standings, and it gets really crazy in November. I can almost promise you that. Now, maybe one of those teams can separate and make things a little bit more clear-cut, but I still think it's going to be all the way off the charts in this season for the Big 12, where you got a lot going for yourselves. I think it's a really, really interesting conference, and one of those conferences that you look at what the ACC is this year, kind of Clemson and everyone else. Something that we talked about yesterday when we broke down the ACC, and there's an opening here for the Big 12 to possibly get two teams in here, especially if a team can separate, maybe go 11-1, 12-0 possibly, and then you have a team that comes in second in the Big 12 that goes 10-2 or goes 11-1 going into that game. Then you're in position to be the team that gets two teams into the CFP. You're in pretty good shape after that. So I think when you look at the Big 12, there's not quite as much big time stuff to talk about as some of the other conferences, but there's a lot of interesting teams. There's a lot of interesting storylines. Could Matt Campbell get back on top of this conference? Could Dave Aranda get back on top of this conference after an incredible year one and since has been a little bit teetery? Could Utah find their footing after a very weird injury-filled year one in the conference? TCU, can they find their way back to the top of this conference with Josh Hoover? And then you got Kansas, Houston, all these other teams that could throw a wrench into all of that. And we'll get into that in the next segment here. We'll talk about the kind of the tiers as I see it. And this isn't necessarily exactly how I would rank these teams, just kind of the groupings that I would put them in as we head into the season, because I think there's some top contenders. I think there's a lot of really interesting contenders, and then there's some dangerous teams that are probably on the outside looking in. But we'll talk about it all right after this, so stick with us. Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just got into some of the bigger storylines in the conference going into the Big 12 year. Obviously, not one of the well, will be one of the crazier conferences, but in terms of preseason stuff, there's not quite as much to talk about because we don't know what to talk about yet. There's so many different teams that could be involved in this thing that it's going to be all over the place. I can almost promise you that. But let's get into some tiers. Let's break down just where I see every team right now. And it's not necessarily the way that I would rank these teams, but maybe sort of the public perception slash just kind of the way that I see this kind of playing out, at least from a national standpoint going into the season. And I think one of the interesting things here is one of the teams that we'll talk about a little bit later in the show, I'm a little bit lower on, finds their way into this top contenders list, at least in terms of preseason talk. And let's talk about them. Let's get into Kansas State, Arizona State, and Texas Tech. Those are who I consider to be the quote-unquote top contenders. I think Kansas State kind of kicks that off. They have the best odds to win this conference. They are one of the best teams in this conference. They have an incredible defense with a lot of guys returning, like VJ Payne, like Austin Romaine, like Desmond Purnell. They have a lot of really, really good talent on that side of the ball. Avery Johnson has to take a step forward. That's kind of the big question in the air around that team is if he can take the step forward. You got Dylan Edwards right next to him. You have Joe Jackson right behind Dylan Edwards. You have Jace Brown on the outside. You have really good talent on this football team all around Avery Johnson. He can't make the mistakes he made a year ago. And he played good football, considering that this was his first time starting. I think we might have put a little bit too much on him going into his first year, probably including myself going into last year, but at the end of the day, I do think this is a very talented team, a very talented quarterback. If he can just dial back those mistakes just a little bit, I think this could be a team that really maybe even runs the table. As crazy as that sounds in a conference like this, I think they have that top end ability. Obviously, Arizona State's in this group. You're returning Sam Levitt, returning Jordan Tyson, hopefully will be fully healthy as they head into the season, bringing in some really fun transfer pieces that we'll talk about a little bit later, returning tons on defense, including your leader in Xavier Alford. They've got dudes. There's no doubt about that. Obviously, the big time question is, can you repeat the magic you had a year ago? You won a lot of one-score games, whether it was Mississippi State at the beginning of the year. I believe it was BYU with the craziness at the end of that game. There was a lot going on for Arizona State, and the ball bounced their way quite a bit last year. Can they find a way to make things a little bit cleaner, especially with Cam Skadbu not being the big-time kind of eraser of a lot of the issues that they had a year ago? He just kind of went in and handled all of it in certain moments where the offense couldn't move the ball. Obviously, he's not going to be around to do that. So, going to be interesting to see how this team develops. I think they still have all the talent in the world and will be able to make some noise, but obviously a couple more hurdles this year than when you had Cam Skadbu in the backfield. Then you got Texas Tech. From the talent level, this is absolutely a team in a great position. I think they brought in some great players with David Bailey, Lee Hunter, Romello Height from Georgia Tech. I think is a very upside player, but overall, you still got some questions. There's no doubt about that. I really think they can start fast in this season, and they probably have to, at least in my mind. I think the noise around this team will get very loud very quickly, and and they're going to have to be able to handle all that. The best way to handle it is to be positive noise around you going into week 5, week 6, whenever that is, where you have that first big time matchup. Can't exactly remember off the top of my head, but will be a huge year for Texas Tech, and I think it's one of those teams that is going to be very volatile in terms of what happens early in the season. If they can execute early in the season, get a couple of wins under the belt, they're going to feel great. If it looks a little bit sloppy, even if they get some wins, maybe this thing starts to tumble a little bit more. But it'll be interesting to watch this develop. I think these three teams, to me, from a talent level, from a quarterback, from a coaching level, are just a little bit above this next group, but this next group is not far behind by any means. And I like to call it the Tier 2 nightmare. I think there is very few quote-unquote tiers in this conference. It's very hard to break down this conference, but the way I see it is these four teams, kind of like what we talked about yesterday with the ACC, the kind of X-factor teams in this conference. I think one of these teams is very likely to make a run to the championship game. Maybe they won't. Maybe one of those 2 out of 3 in the top contenders will, but I do think these four will have plenty to say. We'll start with Iowa State, the team that was there a year ago. Rocco Becht is back. The run game will be good with Abu Sama and Carson Henson. I think the wide receiver room is good. I think replacing those 2 guys from a year ago is going to be really tough. Jaden Higgins and Jalen Noel were about as good as you're going to see at Iowa State for quite some time. But at the end of the day, I do think it's a very talented team. Matt Campbell obviously knows how to coach. I like some of the pieces on defense. They're obviously going to be a team that factors into this conference. Baylor absolutely will be a team in this thing. Dave Aranda has his team now. I think Sawyer Robertson's one of the best quarterbacks, maybe the best quarterback in the entire conference. Bryson Washington has to be pretty special. They just lost Dawson Pendergrass to an injury that probably will keep him out for the entire season. You got to get Bryson Washington the ball early and often, and he's got to execute early and often. So that's going to be an interesting thing to watch, no doubt about it. Probably need to find a true difference maker on the outside. I like Josh Cameron. Can he take that big time step forward like he did in that bowl game late last year? And then you move on to Utah. Devin Dampier coming in from New Mexico is a massive. Jason Beck coming in from New Mexico might be even bigger. He's an incredible offensive coordinator. He takes over for Andy Ludwig that had some great moments. I think really the Cam Rising injury story kind of poo-pooed that time for Andy Ludwig just a little bit more, but love the addition of Jason Beck. I think people are misunderstanding how good this defense is going to be. Whether it's Teo Johnson or Logan Fano or all of the guys they have on this team, it's going to be a really good group on the defensive side of the ball, and Kyle Whittingham very rarely misses 2 years in a row. So I think that's a really interesting team to watch. We'll absolutely play some massive games throughout this season that will define this conference in a lot of ways. And then TCU kind of rounds this out for me, at least the way that I see it. Josh Hoover is about as good as anyone in this conference. He is very experienced, confident player. Kind of reminds me of Max Duggan. I don't want to get any hopes up over there in Dallas, but at the end of the or in Fort Worth, excuse me. But in the end of the day, I do think it's going to be really interesting to watch. The defense, I think, has a lot of really good upside. Obviously, have to play a little bit more consistent, but a very good, talented defense that could help out an offense that I think could kind of go through the roof this year, especially if Eric McAllister can hit the way that he's been able to in the past. Then we got the dangerous but on the outside, at least in my eyes, of this group, and I think it's a pretty expansive group. We'll start with Colorado. I don't know what Colorado will be. I really don't. I think Caden Salter is an absolute wild card. He could play great football one week and then turn the ball over 4 times the next week. I have no idea. They have so much turnover, but what I can tell you is Deion's going to have those guys ready to roll. And they're going to have plenty of talent on that roster. Can they put it all together is going to be the big time question, but I'd be shocked if we got out of this year and Colorado didn't have at least one notch on its belt, at least one big time win, one big time upset that people were not expecting. It's a very good team. It's a team that obviously is coached very well, as we saw a year ago. They should be able to, at the very least, throw a wrench into the works, maybe even find their way back into the conversation like they were a year ago. And then you got Kansas. Jalen Daniels is as good as anyone in this conference when he's really going. Obviously, he's got to be at his best. He's got to be fully healthy, which has been the big-time question mark. But the talent level alone is very incredible. I think it's a really interesting team. They brought in some very nice transfer pieces. Obviously, they got a little bit of work to do, but they absolutely could be the team that they were at the end of last year, where they just threw a wrench into just about everyone's schedule, so much so that they threw a wrench into Iowa State, and then Iowa State was able to bounce back and get to the Big 12, partly because of what Kansas did to other teams down the stretch. So it's a very talented team, obviously very well coached by Lance Leipold. I think they're going to be able to at least make things interesting with a couple of these big-time teams. Then you have Houston. I really like this team. I think adding Connor Wegman to a Willie Fritz operation could look a lot like what Michael Pratt did at Tulane. Obviously, the talent level is going to be a little bit up from when he was at Tulane, but the talent that this kid has is undeniable. Connor Wegman is not a terrible quarterback that absolutely everyone was wrong about. He can make some big-time plays, and injuries and some different stuff at Texas A&M got in his way, but I think this could be a really interesting team going forward, and they could put together a really fun season. Then you have Oklahoma State. Mike Gundy is maybe out after this year. There's been a lot of speculation around that. They did extend him to 2028, I believe, but at the end of the day, you never really know what's going to happen with some of these coaches, especially in the world of college football we live in today. It's a weird quarterback situation. It might be Haas Henne. There's a couple other guys out there that can make a run at it. It's going to be weird. There's no doubt about that. It's going to be an interesting season, but when everyone's focusing on everyone else, tends to be when Mike Gundy does his best work. So I think there's going to be a couple of weekends where we don't know how, but Oklahoma State gets a big time win over one of the big time contenders in this conference. BYU, big time quarterback questions. I like McKay Hillstead. I don't think he's going to be incredible for this team, but Kalani Sitake has every ability to make some special stuff happen. I still think they have some great wide receivers on the outside, even losing Keelan Marion. LJ Martin should be able to help in the run game and make things a little bit easier on Hillstead, at least early on. It'll be interesting to watch this team. I think it's one of the more fascinating teams in the country, obviously, with all the transfer portal stuff that has gone on. But a very talented team, one of those teams that, if the quarterback comes together, maybe they shoot up these rankings a little bit higher than I'm thinking. And then Cincinnati. Brendan Sorsby is a relatively smaller known guy, but a really good player, a guy that can really put it together multiple weeks in a row, and someone that gives Cincinnati a chance to win. They also bring in Evan Pryor from Ohio State, a running back that was kind of just buried on the depth chart there. He found his way over, I believe, last season, but is really kind of hitting his stride and could be a very dangerous guy to watch this year. And then you got the last group, and there's only 3 teams in this bottom group. You're likely not in the hunt, but at this point, who knows? At the end of the day, like we talked about, Arizona State was picked to finish last. So what do I know about this conference at this point? But UCF, Scott Frost isn't walking into the greatest spot. You lose RJ Harvey, it's going to be a little bit interesting down there in Central Florida. I think they have some upside at the quarterback position with Taven Jackson, but I don't necessarily love this team. I think it's going to be really, really hard to make this put together. West Virginia, same thing with Rich Rod. He's not necessarily walking back into a great situation in there in Morgantown, and also it's a very, very fast-paced offense. You're going to want to use a lot of running backs. It sounds like he has about 2 running backs that he feels confident in right now. I love Jaheim White. I think he's an absolute beast, but I think it's going to be a really fast-paced offense where it's going to have to be more than Jaheim White, and I don't know if they have more than Jaheim White. And then Arizona, I hate it for Noah Fafita. I think he's a very talented guy, but the roster is just not very good. I don't really trust the coaching staff. I think it's going to be pretty ugly for Arizona this year. But overall, who knows? All these tiers could mean absolutely nothing in a couple of weeks when Arizona goes and gets a huge win somewhere, or when Oklahoma State comes out of nowhere and puts together a 10-win season. We'll find out how the Big 12 wraps up, and I'll give my questionable picks at the end of this, but let's move on, or let's take a little bit of a break here, and when we come back, let's talk about all the players that you need to know in this conference. We'll do 2 per team, just break down some of the big time names that when you turn on the Big 12 you can say, oh hey, there's that guy that we were talking about on Just Another College Football Podcast. So we'll break it all down right after this, so stick with us. Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about the tiers as I see it going into the season for the Big 12. It's going to be all over the place. You can break them up however you want as far as I'm concerned in this conference. It is going to be crazy. There's going to be a team that comes out of nowhere, and it might just be a team that I just said is probably not in the race. But at the end of the day, we'll see how all of this unfolds. I want to get into some players to watch. I think there's so many interesting players in this conference, even in the teams that I don't think will have a ton to say about this conference. I think they have some really, really interesting guys to talk about. So let's go ahead and jump into this, and let's break it down. Let's start with Arizona here, and a team that probably won't factor in too much, but Ishmael Mahdi is a very interesting running back coming over from Texas State, had 991 rushing yards a year ago, really shifty, really fun, a little bit undersized, I believe like 5'8", 180, so definitely not a big back by any means, but he's very speedy, absolutely can be someone that has some of those chunk plays for the Arizona offense, maybe becomes a good pass catching option for Noah Fafita. It'll be an interesting guy to watch this season. I think very, very talented and absolutely someone that made the jump up to the Power 5 from the Group of 5 and can make some noise this year. And then Tia Savea is a very interesting guy to talk about. He was at Arizona, actually went to Texas in that huge, a ton of big of defensive tackles found their way to Texas last year after Tavondre Sweat and Byron Murphy moved on. Tia Savea never really found his niche. He only had 2 tackles a year ago, was obviously in a stacked room with guys like Alfred Collins and Bill Norton and all of those guys that Texas had a year ago. So not all that surprising, but he is now back at Arizona. He found his way back, and hopefully he can kind of tap into what he had going in 2023, which is a very, very good season where I think he had 3.5 sacks, was really putting together a very nice campaign. Hopefully he can get back to that level for Arizona this year. Arizona State, their cross-state rivals. Kanye Udo is one of the better kept secrets in the entirety of college football. Now, people that are really locked into transfer portal stuff and was really locked into Army a year ago know who this guy is. Had over 1,000 yards a year ago, 10 scores. I think he's a household name by the end of the year. Obviously, replacing Cam Scatabo is going to be as hard as replacing just about anyone in the entire country. This is about as good as you're going to do. He is a very, very physical running back, has plenty of good long speed, and then you add him with a guy like Kason Brown. I think they're going to make some noise. I love Kanye Udo. I think he's a household name by the end of the year. I think he makes play after play for this Arizona State team. And not that he totally makes people forget about Cam Scatabo. I still think they take a step back running the ball. But I think this guy makes that as minimal of a step back as you could possibly hope for. And then Xavier Alford. We talked about him earlier in the show. He is the leader of this defense. Had 2 INTs, 5 pass deflections, 85 tackles a year ago. This could be the Big 12 defensive player of the year. He has all the ability in the world. Another guy that came over from Texas to Arizona State, which they have a lot of those guys, it seems, which is not a bad strategy by any means. Very talented kid, has really gotten comfortable in this defense, and is absolutely someone that could make a whole lot of plays down the stretch and really improve a defense that was a little bit up and down at times for Arizona State. I think this is a huge reason they could take a step forward in that department this year. Then you got Baylor, and Bryson Washington has to lead the way. He is probably, Robertson might be a little bit better, but he is one of the better offensive players on this team. He had over 1,000 yards a year ago, 12 touchdowns. Dawson Pendergrass is out for the season. At least that's what it seems to be right now. A lot is going to be put on this kid's shoulders, and I think he can handle it. He's a very, very talented running back, one of those guys that can just bulldoze through you and then pretty much break off a 50-yard run the next play. Very talented kid, and absolutely will have plenty to say for this Baylor offense. And then Calvin Simpson-Hunt is a very interesting guy. Only has 1 tackle from a year ago, but was a 4-star out of high school, comes over from Ohio State. I think he just needs playing time. He's a very, very talented, very instinctual player. It sounds like he could be playing safety for them and not corner, so that'll be an interesting thing to watch. But he's a very, very talented kid, and I think gives an immediate boost to that back end that really did struggle at different times last year. BYU, it's got to be Chase Roberts. It's got to be the guy that gives this quarterback as good of a chance to succeed as anyone. Obviously, LJ Martin in the backfield is going to be plenty huge as well, but Chase Roberts, 52 catches, 854 yards, and 4 scores a year ago. He's got to be the security blanket. He's got to be the guy that makes this quarterback maybe look a little bit better than he is, or at the very least, helps him get comfortable early on in the season and allows him to become the player that he can be throughout the season. So that's going to be an interesting thing to watch. I think when it comes to wide receiver talent in this conference, very few guys outrank this guy. Very, very talented, has some great speed, is very long and physical. I think he could be a huge player for them, and frankly, I think he might just have to be. And then on the defensive side of the ball, they're going to have to play some really good defense as well, and Tanner Wall is going to be a huge piece of that. 53 tackles, 3 INTs, a pass deflection a year ago. I think they're going to have to be elite on that back end. I think they're going to have to give some short fields to this quarterback, to this offense, and allow them to make the most of it. They did a really good job of that a year ago. I think Tanner Wall and that group is going to have to do plenty more of that this upcoming year, because I don't necessarily think they're going to outscore people to oblivion in this upcoming year. But we'll see what happens. I might be a little bit too low on BYU right now, but Tanner Wall and Chase Roberts just got to be superstars this year. For Cincinnati, it's really interesting. Thought about putting Evan Pryor on here. Absolutely is going to be a piece for them. But Cyrus Allen is a really interesting wide receiver. Went to A&M a year ago, only had 18 catches, 269 yards, but had 778 the year before that, I believe at South Alabama. I could be mistaking him for someone else. Apologies if I am, but very, very talented guy. I think he just needs an opening, needs to stay healthy, and I think he's going to be maybe the go-to guy in this offense. Obviously, they're going to be a little bit more run-heavy than some of these other teams, but I think they have every ability to get upfield and Cyrus Allen's going to have plenty to do with that. And then Dante Corleone, one of the coolest names in the entire sport, one of the best defensive tackles in the entire sport, and had some blood clot problems going into last year. Really had to overcome that kind of in a hurry as they were getting ready for the year, but had 26 tackles, 3.5 sacks. If he's fully healthy this year, he should be incredible for this team and be one of the reasons that maybe, let's say, an Iowa State comes to town and they can't throw the ball all that well, so they're trying to run it and they're just running into big number two over and over and over again. So I think Dante Corleone's about as good of a football player overall as you're going to find in this conference, and Cincinnati needs him to be huge if they're going to win some of those big time games that have kind of eluded them in the past. Moving forward to Colorado, Michael Welch has to hit. Michael Welch has to be a big-time player, a running back coming back for his sophomore season, had 186 yards and 4 scores a year ago. He was the most impressive running back to me. There were a couple of guys that did some nice things for them throughout the season, but when Michael Welch had the ball in his hands, it just felt like everything moved a little bit smoother for them. He's got to hit big this year, because if they can't run the ball this year, you're putting a lot on the shoulders of a kid like Juju Lewis that's coming in maybe making his first start, or Caden Salter that has been known to turn over the football quite a bit. So I think you have to be very careful with this one. You have to be able to run the football this year. Obviously, the offensive line is going to have plenty to do with that, and I have my fair share of questions there, but Michael Welch has to be a big piece of this offense, or I think it's going to be a really big time boomer bust offense. They hit a big time 60-yard touchdown, and then they throw 2 picks in a row in the next 2 series. So they're going to have to be more dynamic on offense this upcoming year, at least more multiple, I should say, on offense in this year, and I think Michael Welch is the key to that. On the defense side of the ball, DJ McKinney is a very, very good player. Probably the best player on this defense. 61 tackles, a forced fumble, 3 INTs, and 8 pass deflections a year ago. He's going to have to hold it down, especially with the loss of Travis Hunter. You don't necessarily have as many security blankets around you. You don't have that one side of the field totally shut off so you can play more guys to your side of the field. He's probably going to be left alone quite a bit on the outside, and he's going to have to be able to really step up. And also, he could very well slide into the slot and play a couple of games at the kind of star nickel position, and that's a very tough position. So it's going to be interesting to watch this guy go. Him and Preston Hodge is a very good duo they have at cornerback, and I think if DJ McKinney can take another step forward, maybe this defense is a little bit better than I'm expecting right now. Moving forward to Houston, Tanner Koziel had one of the weirder off seasons. He was a guy from Ball State, was an 839-yard guy, 8 touchdowns from a year ago, transferred up to Wisconsin for about a week and a half, and then found his way back down to Houston. A very, very talented kid. One of those guys that I think is one of the best tight ends in the entire country. I think he's going to be probably the main target for Connor Wegman. They have some other guys like Stephon Johnson that will absolutely factor in there, but Tanner Koziel is a very, very good player, and I think he's going to make tons of plays for this team, especially in a Willie Fritz offense that loves a good tight end. I think he's going to be a big-time piece for them. And then Jordan Allen comes in from LSU, a very talented 4-star out of high school. He only had 6 tackles a year ago. Obviously, LSU had their fair share of problems on the back end a year ago, but I think you come into Houston, you're obviously going to get a little bit more playing time, and I think he can make the most of it. Obviously, has not quite hit the talent level that was dubbed for him coming out of high school, but I think he can probably make it happen this year. At the very least, can be a big-time player and a big-time leader on the back end for Houston. Iowa State, they lost 2 big-time wide receivers. I think they replaced them with a very good wide receiver in Chase Sewell. 34 catches, 678 yards, and 3 scores a year ago for Eastern Carolina. This kid can play. There's no doubt about that. He can absolutely be the number 1 guy on this offense going into this year. I think he has all the ability in the world. The problem is he's going to have to pick up quite a bit of slack. Jaden Higgins and Jalen Noel are not replaceable guys by any means. So Chase Sewell is going to have to be even better than he was a year ago at Eastern Carolina, with a little bit better competition right across from him. And then Jontez Williams, the guy he's going to be practicing against a lot in camp, the safety that had 46 tackles, 4 INTs, and 5 pass deflections a year ago. I think Iowa State's going to be a team that's probably going to need some short fields. I don't think they're going to be a bad offense by any means, but I do think they're going to be a run-heavy offense that probably could work with some... Just give them some short field from time to time. Allow that defense to give you some openings, and I think Jontez Williams might be the leader in that group of giving you chances on offense for those short fields. So it's going to be interesting to watch Iowa State, especially in just about 10 days here, 11 days here, go to work. But Jontez Williams and Chase Sewell have to make an impression right away this season. Moving over to Kansas, they went into the portal and got quite a few guys. Emmanuel Henderson has to be the number one guy in this wide receiver room. I think they have some other really talented guys. I think this is the biggest freak show, I should say, of the group. 4 catches, 82 yards a year ago for Alabama. He's really fast. He can absolutely fly. If you can get this guy the ball in this guy's hands with space in front of him, he's going to make a lot of guys miss. And obviously, at Alabama, it's going to be really hard to get that to happen the way that you want it to, especially in those wide receiver rooms. So I think he's going to get a ton of targets. I think he's got to be a player that shows up for Kansas, or it could be kind of a weird year for the Jayhawks once again. And then Joseph Sipp Jr. is a guy coming over from Bowling Green, 79 tackles, 7 sacks. He's just a freak of nature. He's one of those guys that you turn on a G5 game and you're thinking, how is this guy not on the Power 4 roster? Well, now he is. He's a very, very talented kid, kind of moves all over the place, plays a little bit of that edge rushing type style, but can step inside and make some really, really good plays at middle linebacker as well. So, very talented kid. Cannot wait to see him on a little bit bigger of a stage than he was before. Their cross-state rivals, Kansas State, Jace Brown's a beast. He's one of the best wide receivers in this entire conference, maybe even second now that I think about it, but I'll have to do a little bit more digging there. He had 47 catches, 823 yards, 5 touchdowns a year ago. He's got to be huge this year. I think they're going to run the ball. They're going to be a run-first team with Avery Johnson, with Dylan Edwards, with Joe Jackson. Jace Brown's got to be the difference maker on the outside, and he has been the last couple of years. They haven't quite been able to put it together around him, but if he gets a couple of guys to just go 400 yards, 500 yards, and then he can bounce for a 1,000-yard type season. Maybe that's a little bit lofty for Kansas State, but at the end of the day, I do think he has a ton in the bag that he can really, really unlock this year. Then Austin Romaine, one of the best linebackers you'll find in the entire country, probably will be on the short list for the Buckets towards the end of the year. 96 tackles, 2 sacks, 3 forced fumbles a year ago. This guy's an animal in every sense of the word, and he's absolutely going to be someone that needs to play huge for this team. The back end of that defense is questionable. I think they have some talented guys, but definitely have some questions to answer. I think if that run game, that front seven led by Austin Romaine can be really locked down, they're going to have much more ability. There's no doubt about that, and he is going to be a huge piece of just this defense working. Definitely the green dot guy for this team, and will be the leader of this team probably as a whole going into this season. Oklahoma State, Trent Howland has to be nervous about the shoes that he is filling with Ollie Gordon moving on. Obviously, last year was one to forget for Ollie Gordon, but Trent Howland came in at time to time, had 230 yards and a touchdown a year ago. He's going to have to be huge. There's no two ways about that. They have a quarterback coming in that has not played a lot of football. They don't have a ton of great weapons, especially after losing Deshaun Stribling to Ole Miss in the offseason. He's got to hit. He's got to be a big-time player for them because they're going to have to be able to run the ball well if they're going to want to do just about anything in this conference. Then you got J.K. Johnson coming in from LSU, another guy that just didn't quite have it at LSU. There was a lot of different stuff that kind of played into that, but is a very talented kid. 3 tackles a year ago. I think he's someone that can make a big-time jump this year and probably needs to. If Oklahoma State, again, is going to do anything of substance this year, these 2 guys probably have to be big-time players for them. Moving on to TCU, if you don't know the name Jordan Dwyer, I totally understand, first of all, but you should know that name. He had 1,192 yards a year ago, 12 scores at Idaho. This kid can play, and I understand he's coming from the FCS level all the way up. I still think he can be the number 1 wide receiver for this team. Eric McAllister will have plenty to say about that, but I do think this is a player that can make all types of differences for this team. Then you got Nnamdi Obiazor, but linebacker, very talented, 81 tackles, 2.5 sacks, a forced fumble, and an INT a year ago. This guy's the leader of this defense, and he's got to be. Him and Bud Clark are the 2 guys that everyone turns to in practice and follows by example. He's a huge player for this team, and especially if he can get after the passer just a little bit more this year, I think this TCU team has every ability to win this conference. Moving forward to Texas Tech, Coy Eakin is a very interesting guy here. We're talking all about the transfers that have been brought in, and can Barry Morton put it together? Can they replace Taj Brooks in the run game? Coy Eakin's a really good wide receiver. 49 catches, 652 yards, 7 scores a year ago. He can make a lot of big-time plays for this team. They're reintroducing Micah Hudson after a brief hiatus in the offseason, another kind of bouncing around the portal type guy. But Coy Eakin could very well be the number one wide receiver on this team this year. A lot of confidence between him and Baron Morton, and he's got to be a difference maker. I think when you open up the rest of this offense, it's probably got to be Coy Eakin to do so. And then Cole Wisniewski is another guy coming over from North Dakota State at the safety position. Very experienced guy. 50 tackles, a forced fumble, 8 INTs, and 5 pass deflections a year ago. This guy can play. There's no two ways about that. He has every ability in the world to make some really special things happen. I think he's going to be a huge player for this team. Now, can he be the big-time player that they might need him to be on the back end and make some of those huge plays that he made for North Dakota State a year ago? I don't know. It's a big-time jump, but at the end of the day, I do think he has all the ability in the world and will definitely be a huge help in the run game. UCF, one of the worst teams in this conference, but love Jaden Nixon. Jaden Nixon comes in from Western Michigan, had 919 yards a year ago, 12 scores. Very, very talented kid. A little bit undersized as well, but shifty, kind of like an RJ Harvey. RJ Harvey was a little bit bigger, but at the end of the day, one of those guys that can hit some big time, 65, 75 type yard runs that really take the top off a defense and maybe give UCF a big time win sometime throughout this season. And then Sencire Edwards coming in from Pitt, 17 tackles, 3 sacks, 2 pass deflections a year ago. This guy's got to hit. I think when you talk about UCF this year, it's going to come down to hitting some of those big-time plays, whether it's in the run game or the pass game, and then getting after the quarterback in a way that maybe we're not expecting right now. And Sencire Edwards probably is going to have to lead the way in that respect. It's one of those teams that is riding an absolute tightrope if they're going to do anything special this year, and I think these two guys have to be a huge part of this team this year. Utah brought in a very good player from New Mexico that it was not named Devin Dampier. They brought in Ryan Davis, the wide receiver, 747 yards a year ago, 3 touchdowns, a guy that can make all types of plays around the field. And they have other guys to go along with him. I don't necessarily think he has to be the number one guy for this team. I think he very well could be. He's a very, very talented guy, absolutely someone that runs routes incredibly well, and I think him and Devin Dampier have obviously a good rapport about them from their time at New Mexico. I think he's going to be a huge player for Utah. And then Teo Johnson's incredible. He's one of the best DBs in the country, had 70 tackles, an INT, 4 pass deflections, a forced fumble a year ago. This kid's going to be awesome. And there's going to be so many incredible players on this defense for Utah, but I think this is the guy that might make the most highlight plays. I think he's going to make a number of plays throughout the season that a lot of people that change the trajectory of Utah's games, of Utah's season, and maybe just puts them in a playoff type situation. But very talented kid. Cannot wait to see him explode on the national scale this year. And then West Virginia, another team that's walking a tightrope. Jaheim White's awesome. He is absolutely incredible a year ago. 845 yards, 7 touchdowns. One of those guys that I think can take a huge leap in the Rich Rod offense. The only problem is it goes very quickly. If he's not fully conditioned, they're going to be rotating quite a few guys in, and it doesn't sound like they have a lot of guys to rotate in. So he's going to get quite a bit of work probably early on in the season. We'll see if he can hold up to all that noise. And then Fred Perry, coming over from Jacksonville State, is a very talented safety. 109 tackles a year ago, 3 sacks, 2 forced fumbles, 2 INTs. This could be a guy that comes up from the Group of 5 level and shocks a lot of people in the Big 12 this upcoming year. I really like this kid, and I think he can make some noise in 2025. Overall, I think when you look at the Big 12, there's going to be a lot of unknowns. There's going to be a lot of unknowns in the Iowa State wide receiver room, in the Arizona State running back room. There's a lot of different moving parts in this conference. There's a lot of really talented transfers coming in, either from bigger schools or from Army or from FCS or from Group of 5. They're coming from all over the place, and I think there's a lot of really, really good diamonds in the rough. My favorite, personally, is Jordan Dwyer. I think the wide receiver out of Idaho is going to be an absolute star for TCU this upcoming year, and I think he might just be maybe the transfer of the year in this conference. But we'll get to that in the next one. Actually, don't even have him picked for my transfer of the year, but we got superlatives, my full conference prediction, my championship pick, my champion. It's very, very tough to put this thing together, but at the end of the day, I'll make all my picks right after this, so stick with us. Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about just players to watch in this conference. I think there's so many interesting players. Jordan Dwyer to me is my favorite, but at the end of the day, I think there's going to be a lot of really interesting guys this year and a lot of moving parts and so many different teams in this conference. But we got to get into some picks. I'll get some superlatives and then my championship pick and my champion. I'm not going to give out exact records for all of these teams. Just feel like that's a little bit of a fool's errand, especially in this conference. So we'll kind of leave that to the wayside, at least for the time being. Maybe I'll give some more concrete picks closer to the season on specific teams. But at the end of the day, let's go ahead and jump into this thing and let's start with game of the year. And I'm going to go Texas Tech at Arizona State on October 18th. This one's going to be huge. I think it's one of those games that everyone's looking forward to. It's the team that won the conference last year with the team that has done everything in their power to possibly win the conference this year. Could be kind of a who's going to step into the role of dominating the conference over the next little bit. I don't know if anyone's going to really dominate the conference, but at least sitting atop the conference over the next couple of years. This could be a game that decides that. Plus, a revenge game for Arizona State. One of the games in the conference that Arizona State did not come out on the winning side of was the first game of the conference schedule. So Arizona State really turned a corner after that game. So it'll be really interesting to watch this one develop right early enough in the year where stuff is still developing. It'll be really interesting to watch this game unfold, and I think could very well decide which one of these teams gets to the Big 12 championship and which one of those teams is sitting on the couch. Kansas State at Baylor is my underrated game of the year. I think that's a game that is going to really define this conference in a number of different ways. Avery Johnson versus Sawyer Robertson is a very fun quarterback battle that we're going to have in that one. I think it's one that's going to define these two teams in this year. I think if Kansas State, let's say they beat Iowa State in the first game of the season, they're rolling right through their out-of-conference schedule. They get to this game. If they win this one, they're firmly in place to make the title game. If Baylor finds a way to win this one, even if they've lost to Auburn earlier in the year and maybe some other things have happened since then, I think they're in a great position to possibly be that second team that finds their way in. At the end of the day, obviously, most of it will be decided after this game, but I think this could be one of those games, kind of like Colorado-Baylor a year ago, where if Colorado doesn't hit that Hail Mary at the very end of that game, Baylor wins that game, and Baylor goes to the Big 12 championship in that season. So it's going to be really interesting to watch this one develop. Hopefully it's not quite as heartbreaking for Baylor as it was a year ago with that Colorado game, but I think this one's going to be huge to decide who might be that second team up there in Dallas at the end of the year. Then I got my surprise team of the year. I'm going to go with the Houston Cougars. I think this team is really, really fun. I think Connor Wegman coming in with Willie Fritz is really intriguing to me. Kind of fits the Michael Pratt type design. I think Tanner Koziel is as big of a portal pickup as you're going to find in this entire conference. Really love some of the other portal additions they made. I think Stephon Johnson at wide receiver can take a big-time step forward. I think this could be a special team. I don't necessarily think they're going to be like, 9-3, 10-2 competing for this conference. I think they're going to be the team that really messes up a lot of other people, whether that's Texas Tech or that's Arizona State or that's Utah. I don't know exactly who's on that schedule right this second off the top of my head, but at the end of the day, I do think this is a team that has a lot in place, and I really trust Willie Fritz to put something pretty special together over there in Houston this year. Then disappointing team, I'm going to go with Texas Tech. And it's a very weird situation because I'm not talking 5-7 disappointing. I'm not talking they're going to be a terrible team that never finds their stride, that can't do anything offensively, that defense just none of the portal guys work out. What I'm saying is I think the expectations on this team might be a little bit out of reach for this team in particular. Not that they're a bad team by any means. I think they're going to play really good football at times. I think some of the defensive additions are going to be great, like a David Bailey. But when I look at this conference as a whole, I think it's going to be incredibly close. I think the teams that added guys in the portal might be at a little bit of a disadvantage. Not to say that they didn't get more talented, just to say the continuity is a huge part of this conference. I don't think they're going to go 5-7. I could very well see them not getting to 9 wins, and a lot of people looking around wondering, was this a success for Texas Tech in 2025, or was this a little bit of a waste of money? I know that sounds a little bit crazy to say. I think they're going to be a good team. I just think teams or fans around there are expecting a great team. I don't think you're going to get that this year. My freshman of the year is Lincoln Kerr, and there was a couple of different guys that I kicked around for this. There's definitely some guys over at Colorado that can make some big-time impacts, but I think Lincoln Kerr is going to be a beast. And Kansas State has an incredible tight end group. They're going to run a lot of 12 personnel, maybe even some 13 personnel, depending on the situation. Lincoln Kerr can basically be a wide receiver for you. He is so long, so talented, so fluid going through his routes. I think he's going to be an absolute beast for this offense. And I think it's going to be one of those things where at times Avery Johnson's passing has been a little bit all over the place. Doesn't hurt to have a 6'7" guy standing in the middle of the field that can catch just about everything. So I think he's a freak of nature. I think although maybe it'll be a little bit slower of a start when it comes to the opportunities he's going to get this season, I think he's going to finish really, really strong. And although there's some really good freshmen in this group, could have picked Juju Lewis over there at Colorado, as well as some other guys. I'm going to go with Lincoln Kerr to make a big-time impact for the Kansas State Wildcats in 2025. In terms of transfer of the year, it's Devin Dampier. I think this guy's going to be a freak for Utah. When you look at him last year at New Mexico, he made so many incredible plays behind a really bad offensive line. With all due respect to the New Mexico offensive line from a year ago, he's going to have two of the best tackles in the entire country with Spencer Fano and Caleb Lumu. They're going to have really, really good talent across that offensive line. And he's going to have guys around him. Not necessarily absolute freaks of nature, but Tobias Merriweather can play some really good football. We talked about Ryan Davis earlier. Absolutely can be a guy that can make some plays. Wayshawn Parker coming in from Washington State to be the backup running back. Really good hands out of the backfield and can be a very dangerous player, make some big-time plays for you. I think this guy's going to be a household name by the end of the year. I think if you didn't know the name, you should have, if I'm being totally honest, but totally understand not being locked into Lobos football all the time. So he's a very talented guy. He has a huge opportunity, a much better offensive line, better weapons. I think he's going to be a star at the end of this year and do some really special things for Utah. The Offensive Player of the Year, as far as I'm concerned, is Jordan Tyson. I don't find a better player in this entire conference than Jordan Tyson. I think when you look at wide receivers across the country, I'd have him number 2 behind Jeremiah Smith. I think he is that good. I think he is better than a Ryan Williams. I think he's better than a lot of these guys that we put on a little bit of a pedestal. This guy's a freak. And if he was healthy in that Texas game, who's to say they wouldn't have won that game, moved on to play Ohio State? I don't think they would have beaten Ohio State, but you never really know. It's a very, very talented player that they lost halfway through the season. If he is healthy, he's going to put up crazy numbers. He's going to be the number one option on this team. He's going to be the top wide receiver in this conference. I think he's going to be the best offensive player in this conference. Now, obviously, his quarterback could kind of steal that from him with him getting the stats that Jordan Tyson gets, but I think Jordan Tyson's going to be so jump off the page incredible that he's going to get this award at the very end of the year. Love this player, and I think he's someone that I think NFL teams are going to be falling over each other to get in the first round next year. For defensive side of the ball, I'm going Logan Fano. This is a guy that hasn't quite hit the crazy numbers that a lot of people expected from him, but he's still relatively young. Is still a guy that can make so many different plays and absolutely get off the edge very, very aggressively. I believe had 3.5 sacks a year ago, if I'm not mistaken. Can make much more than that this year. Is absolutely a guy that can get after the quarterback. I think when you talk about Utah as a whole, that back end is going to be so tough to deal with that they're going to be able to pin their ears back and go after quarterbacks a lot. And I think Logan Fano is going to be at the very center of that. Teo Johnson, his teammate, might just steal it from him, if I'm being totally honest. Thought about putting him here as well, but I think Logan Fano is an absolute beast. I think his brother might be a little bit more of a beast at the left tackle position for them, but at the end of the day, I think Logan holds his own very, very well and is going to be a freak of nature coming off the edge for Utah this year. For my coach of the year, I'm going Kyle Whittingham. I think he puts it all together. I think this team is a very, very talented team. We'll get to it here in a second. I think they're a team that can put a lot of really, really good things together. I also think last year, you think back on last year and you think they went 5-7, everything went wrong for them. If Cam Rising was on the field, I think that's an 8-4, 9-3 team. That's probably in the mix for the Big 12 title. And that sounds crazy how big of a jump that would be. But the reality is, I think a lot of people are looking at them saying, they just got to find their way back up. And they're obviously, towards the top of the conference in a lot of preseason polls and everything. But if this guy goes 10-2, or if he goes 11-1, or even 12-0, he has the ability to do that. If he does, he's absolutely going to be the pick here. And frankly, I don't think it hurts too much that it might just be his last year in college football. Obviously, that shouldn't have too much bearing on the award, but let's be totally honest. The people voting on this, have a little bit of a heart, and they're going to understand that this would be a very cool moment for him. I think he's going to more than earn it. I don't want to say that he's not going to earn it by any means, but I think he's going to be the guy that ends up winning this Coach of the Year, and I think he rides off into the sunset, at least getting to the conference championship matchup. Arizona State against Utah is my pick for the conference championship matchup in 2025. I think they have game changers at quarterback. I think they have really solid veteran defenses, great weapons. I think both of them have run games that, although they're transfers coming in, will be plenty talented. I really like some of the wide receivers. Obviously, Jordan Tyson chief among them, and elite head coaches on two very different sides of the spectrum when it talks about the time they spent in college football. Obviously, Kenny Dillingham is going to be one of the younger coaches, one of the more special coaches in this sport right now. Kyle Whittingham obviously is going to be a huge part of this sport even when he's far gone. You know, he's going to be one of those guys that maybe not everyone talks about quite as much as they should, but is a really special head coach that has put together a really special career. I think he finishes it off with a Big 12 title. I think the Utah Utes are going to win the Big 12 title this upcoming year. I think Devin Dampier is that good, and I think people are going to figure out that obviously New Mexico up to Utah is quite the jump. It's not going to matter for this kid. I think he's an absolute freak of nature. I think Wayshawn Parker is one of the more underrated running backs in the entire country. I think this team has all the ability in the world to make some special stuff happen. The defense is absolutely veteran as can be and really, really talented. And then I think they have the best coach in the conference. I still think that Kyle Whittingham is the very best coach in the Big 12 in a sea of incredible coaches. I think he is the best coach of the bunch. So I'm going to go with Utah to win this conference, a conference that, frankly, pick any of the 16 teams. Obviously, some of them I'll be a little bit more questionable about than others, but I would have been very questionable about Arizona State going into last year. So no one knows. This conference is going to be all over the place. The Big 12 is America's conference for a reason. It feels like college football every single week. Every team can beat every other team in that conference on any given Saturday. It is the perfect conference in my eyes. It is absolutely perfect in every way. We have a quote-unquote villain in Texas Tech that's trying to buy their way to the top. We have some great, Cinderella stories that could possibly happen in a Baylor or a BYU after losing their quarterback could make a run. You never really know what's going to happen in this conference. That's why I love it so much. It's my favorite conference in the entire country. Always love picking this one, although it's kind of just throwing darts at a dartboard blindfolded. But it'll be really fun to watch this one unfold. We'll obviously jump into more details as we get a little bit closer to this season kicking off for them, but that'll wrap it up. That'll do it for this edition of Just Another College Football Podcast. Please do like, subscribe, do all that stuff on as many platforms as you can. If you're watching on YouTube right now, go on over to Spotify and give that one a follow. If you're listening on Spotify, do the same thing on YouTube. It would mean the world to me. Absolutely does help all the stuff that I'm doing, and we're going to be back tomorrow, and we're going to get into the Big Ten. We're going to stick with the big conferences, quote unquote. We'll go to the Big Ten tomorrow. We'll get into a weird conference. One of those conferences that I feel like has pretty defined tiers. Within those tiers, I have no earthly idea what's going to happen. So we'll break all that down tomorrow. It's going to be a really fun time, and I'll see you then. Thank you so much for tuning in.